Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Helldivers 2. Today we got some more build videos, and today's builds are to help you take out the alien threat of the Illuminate. I've been wanting to do Illuminate builds for a little while, but since the Illuminate are still kind of new and there's not a whole lot of Illuminate types of enemies, I wasn't sure exactly when to do them, but I figured now's a good time as any. And before you ask about the hat, my hair is a complete mess and needs to be cut, and I did not feel like putting it together, so this is what you have to deal with. But in any event, let's not waste any time and get right into the video where I have 3 good builds for the Illuminate that you guys can try out. And if you like this and want to see more Helldivers 2 content in the future, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing. That way you never miss another Helldivers 2 upload. So again, similar to the last video I did talking about terminid builds, I'm going to have 3 builds that I'm going to go through that are pretty well themed and put together. And again, like the last one, I'm going to have alternatives to some of the stuff that I put up because a lot of it is equipment or weapons that are linked behind war bonds. So if you don't have access to them, I'm going to give some alternatives.
I only have like $3.50, so it's hard.
And specifically regarding the Illuminate, since they are still relatively new to Helldivers 2, and there are not too many variations of the Illuminate that you can fight, and they're probably going to be adding more in at some point, keep in mind that these builds might not necessarily last a crazy amount of time, but at least for right now, these are pretty effective. So the very first build I have for you is what I have dubbed the Alien Slayer build. This one focuses on just being kind of general use, doesn't necessarily focus on one thing, but it leads a little bit more into the small enemy destruction and just light horde culling with a couple of ways to deal with the bigger and tougher enemies. Talking about weapons, first, the primary weapon that I'm using is the Tenderizer. This is one of my favorite auto rifles in the entire game, but if you don't have access to this, the default Liberator would work perfectly fine. In fact, it would work a little bit better in some regards because the magazine capacity is a little bit higher, so you don't have to reload as much, which is nice. For secondaries, I'm running the Senator because it is just phenomenal, and having pocket heavy armor destruction is just great, but the default Peacemaker would also work very well. And then for throwables, I'm running the impact grenades just because they're great. They can take out the alien ships in one hit if you hit them in the doors that the enemies come out of. And then talking about armor, really you just want to have something that has the Siege Ready passive because that just makes this entire build work incredibly well. Siege Ready is phenomenal, especially now since they said that they're not going to be changing the bug. That makes it so that way it works with not just your primary weapon, they're just going to keep it as a feature, which is great. And this just gives you more ammo for your weapons as well as increasing the reload speed, which is phenomenal, especially since the Tenderizer is great, but it does have a relatively small magazine, so you kind of want that extra reserve ammo to kind of not burn through it too fast. But if you didn't want to use Siege Ready, anything with Engineering Kit or even Democracy Protects would be pretty nice, but really Siege Ready is what you want with this. And then talking about stratagems, the 4 we are running with this particular build are the Recoilless Rifle, the Eagle Strafe Run, the Orbital Laser, and the Machine Gun Sentry, which appears a bit of a surprise to some people because not a lot of people mention the Machine Gun Sentry, but I'll break it down for you. So the Recoilless Rifle is phenomenal against the Harvesters. If you have good aim, it is just great once you take the shields down, and if you're able to hit them directly in the eye, it takes them out in one shot, which is great. And there's not too many other big things that you need to worry about, and it can also take out the ships that are dropping in reinforcements, which can be very useful. The Strafing Run, especially on the Illuminate type maps that are very city focused and have those long streets, Strafing Run is phenomenal. It can take out the large groups of voteless as well as the overseers. Just kite them down the street and then throw this right behind you and it'll take them all out. It's just great. The Orbital Laser is our pocket to just clear the whole area. You want to just level an entire outpost or just a group of enemies that you just can't quite pin down. The Orbital Laser is always a great choice for something like that. And then talking about the Machine Gun Sentry, again, because a lot of people are probably going to be really confused as to why I'm running the Machine Gun Sentry, but if you really break it down, the Machine Gun Sentry is probably a little bit better in terms of efficiency than the Gatling Sentry because the cooldown for it is incredibly low. The cooldown for it is, it's only 90 seconds compared to the Gatling Sentry is 150. So you have essentially half the amount of time that you have to wait for something that ultimately is going to do the same thing, because similar to the Strafing Run, you're going to be using this to basically take out the bigger groups of smaller enemies, and you want to be able to throw this down as much as you can, which in certain mission types can be incredibly useful. So overall, like I said, this build has a lot of different ways that it can work, and it doesn't necessarily focus on doing one thing very well. Instead, it just kind of touches on everything. It's really good for taking out the packs of voteless. If you see Harvesters in the distance, you can either use your Recoilless Rifle or just throw your laser over there and it'll eventually take it out. You kind of have ways that you can handle just about everything with this particular build, and it's very useful. And again, the Tenderizer is what I'm using for my primary, but pretty much anything with a high rate of fire is essentially going to work wonders for a build like this. So don't necessarily feel like you need to use something like that. It's just what I personally wanted to use. And then talking about the second build, this one is a little bit more meme-centric, kind of similar to the last video I did talking about the terminid builds where I did the flame build, but this is what I like to call the shock trooper build, and it functions exactly how it sounds. For weapons, unfortunately, there really isn't an option that you can do other than the blitzer shotgun, which is kind of the whole basic theme around this build is electricity damage. So you really can't use anything other than the blitzer shotgun, which I do apologize for. And then for secondary weapons, you can pretty much use anything you want for a secondary weapon. I'm using the Loyalist from the Truth Enforcers Warbond, which honestly works very well. It's a nice plasma pistol just to kind of keep on theme with the energy base of this particular build. And then for grenades, if you wanted to stay on theme with the electricity damage, you could go with the stun grenades just to kind of have that sort of shock value added in there, but you don't necessarily have to, and you can pretty much use whatever you want for throwables. And then for armor, we are using anything that has electrical conduit. I know it's a meme passive. It really doesn't do a whole lot. However, against the Illuminate, it does have the most value because you have the Tesla towers, you have the Watchers, you have the Harvesters that do a little bit of arc damage if you can survive. And with our particular build, you also kind of want to have this just to protect yourself from your own damage, which I'll talk about a little bit. But essentially for this build, yes, you want electrical conduit, but if you don't want to do that, if you have, say, acclimated from one of the kill zone armors, that could also work very well. Or if you just want to run something like extra padding or democracy protects, that would work fine as well. And then for stratagems, as you can probably guess, we're going all the way in with the electrical damage. So we're running the arc thrower, running the Tesla tower, running the jump pack, and then finally, if you really want to stay on theme with the shock damage, you can run the orbital EMS strike, which stuns everything it hits. But if you want to change that out for something else, you could. I'm not going to hold you to that. You could probably make an argument that the orbital laser can be a shock stratagem because it's a combined beam of electric and fire. I'm sure you could probably find some way to work that in. But if you want to go full blown on theme with the electricity damage, then the orbital EMS strike is probably your best bet. Or you could also go with the EMS mortar, but I'm personally not a big fan of the EMS mortar, so that's why I'm just running the standard EMS strike. And then no surprise, the strategy with this particular build is we're going to shock basically everything, and it works actually very well in that regard. The combination of the blitzer shotgun and the arc thrower allows us to basically keep everything stun locked. The main setup that I was using was when I get swarmed by packs of voteless, I was using the blitzer, which is able to arc from enemy to enemy, which worked incredibly well. And if I was coming up against any overseers or elevated overseers, I would switch the arc thrower, which has a lot more range, but both of them have the ability to stun the overseers, which is incredibly useful, as especially those ones that try to come up to you and stun lock you in a melee combo are just incredibly annoying. And also just the flying overseers in general are incredibly annoying, so this can kind of help you slow them down a lot. The Tesla tower is our main source of crowd control. You basically just throw this into a group of enemies and just watch the electricity rip them up. And actually against the Illuminate, it works pretty well because since they are going to want to try to go towards the sentry gun to destroy it, since the Tesla tower does damage when enemies get close to it, you're basically just feeding into it, which is incredibly useful. And then the EMS strike, again, you don't necessarily have to use it, but it is very nice for slowing down the enemies. And the main premise of this build is just you're trying to shock and stun everything. The only real thing that this build doesn't have anything to take out is the Harvesters. They are kind of a big problem with this build. Again, it's a very meme-centric build, so if you see a Harvester, you're kind of going to scream a little bit because you're not going to have anything that's really going to be able to take it out. So if you wanted to replace the EMS strike with something like the rail cannon or just something to take out the Harvesters, I would completely understand that. But just remember, this is basically just a meme build for if you want to just shock everything. And I just wanted to have the jetpack because I just wanted an excuse to run the jump pack because it's a lot of fun. So if you are enjoying this video, please be sure to consider subscribing because we're only about 1,000 subscribers away from 25K, and it would really mean a lot to me if you would help me get to that point. So if you like this video, want to see more, consider subscribing. It is free. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free real estate. And it would really help me out a lot. And then the last build I have for you today is what I like to call the Earth Defender build. And this is honestly very similar to a build I did the last video with the Terminid build, in that it is very good at taking out these smaller enemies with a decent amount of big target damage as well. For weapons, you really want to use anything that has medium armor penetration for your primary. For me, I went with the Plas 101 Purifier, which is really good, especially for the Illuminate, because you're able to take out big groups of voteless if you charge up the shots, and you are also able to take out the overseers pretty quickly. Even the ones that have the shields, you're able to sort of damage through them. But again, anything with medium armor pen is going to be something that you want to use. So the slugger shotgun, the diligence counter sniper, pretty much any of them will work out very well. Again, secondary weapon using the senator, but the peacemaker could work incredibly well.
Daring today, aren't we?
And for throwables, the impacts would work perfectly fine. And then for armor, again, anything with siege ready would probably be really good. But if you don't want to go with that, engineering kit or fortified would be great because the recoil reduction for both of them would be really nice to have. And for stratagems, we are running the Eagle Airstrike, the Orbital Rail Cannon, the Stalwart Heavy Machine Gun, and the Shield Generator pack. So this build honestly functions very similar to, again, one of the ones that I mentioned in my Terminid build, and it just kind of functions the same way. Basically, you're going to be using the Stalwart more like your primary weapon than your actual primary weapon, which is why having something with medium armor penetration is really nice because it allows you to use this kind of as your specialty weapon, take out those bigger, tougher enemies that you just can't quite pin down with the Stalwart. You're basically going to be using the Stalwart to mow through the voteless and even soften up the overseers if you get the chance. And then the Shield Generator pack can keep you alive, but if you wanted to swap this out for something like the Guard Dog, that would also work out well. And then with the combination of the Eagle Airstrike and the Orbital Rail Cannon, you basically have ways to handle just about anything. The Eagle Airstrike is what I like to call the Swiss Army knife of stratagems. It can do so many different things and can take out just about anything you want. And the Orbital Rail Cannon is our pocket to get something off the field very quickly stratagem. It's mainly going to be used for those harvesters that we just can't quite pin down, but actually, especially in my case, since I was using the Purifier, it actually does have the ability to damage the harvesters at least a little bit. So if you are running that, can do a good amount of damage to them. And overall, this build is probably just one of the more fun ones to use because it just has a little bit of everything to it. And it is pretty easy to use. You don't have to have too much thought process in essentially anything that you're doing. The Stalwart is great against the voteless. The Purifier is great against the overseers, and essentially everything else that you have can be kitted out to handle just about any sort of situation you come across, either outposts or harvesters. Really anything can be taken out pretty easily. And again, keep in mind with all these builds that when the new enemies get added to the Illuminate at some point in time, because I'm assuming we're going to be getting more than 4 or 5 enemy types for the Illuminate at some point, these builds will most likely still work, but will probably need to be improved or changed upon. So if you guys want to see more Illuminate builds later on down the line, or other builds for things like automatons or just other bug builds, if you want to see different variations of them, be sure to let me know down in the comments. And as always, I hope you guys found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting that like button and consider becoming a member and subscribing today, as it really helps me out a lot and it lets me do more fun stuff like this. For Super Earth Helldivers, I'll see you in the next video.